Welcome to session number 2. In this session, we're going to be talking about how to build and grow and lead your leadership team. Without a leadership team, leading by yourself, there's a few big problems. One is if you get sick or if you get burned out or if you get busy, then you end up having to shut down the entire outreach to the community. And a lot of times that ends up making all the effort that was put into it kind of null and void. Right? So one is you have some continuation planning, some succession should you end up needing to leave. But the second reason is just as it's best to go through healing in community, in loving, trusting relationships, guess what? It's also best to lead in the context of community, in loving, trusting relationships. There's so many benefits. And over the years, the three of us have actually led dozens of courses together. I mean, some of the best times I can remember is us being able to lead courses and just using our unique personalities. And we've got so many different backgrounds. One a medical, one a soldier, one a really attractive guy. I mean, I don't really know, right? There's all these different...
GQ model?
Right,
no.
Right, a GQ.
What is in the
more
water?
More like a DQ model, like a Dairy Queen model. More like that than GQ. So, right, there's a couple things when we talk about leadership teams, we want to talk about what are some tips for you as a leader. All right, here we go. Back to business. Ready? Here's the statement that we say. People belong, then they believe. Because you're building a community. Let's just talk about what are some leadership team tips that you want to keep front and center. And we know there's kind of a laundry list here. We're not going to cover them all because that would be really time consuming. But we're going to highlight on the next 2 pages just a few of the most important items. What would you guys like to spotlight first?
Well, I'm going to spotlight the most obvious one for this moment, which is laugh together, right? From the beginning of Reboot, Evan and I have never taken ourselves too seriously. And that's because we found ourselves kind of out there doing something we were not super comfortable with. It's nerve-wracking. You might say something wrong. And so just setting that tone of like, we're gonna mess up. We're okay with that. We're gonna laugh together. You might mess up. But that's just building that foundation of community and belongingness that's so important. So laughter is good medicine.
It is. Brian?
Yeah, for me, I think it's praying outside of the group meeting or not being afraid to pray with somebody in the group, even pausing it to specifically pray. One of the habits that I've gotten into is regardless of where the group is that I'm leading, or even if I'm just popping in on a Zoom meeting just to say hello for a group, I have a prayer team established that I'm constantly sending stuff to as well. So I'm praying and they're praying as well.
That's good. That's good stuff. Jenny, what else on this list here? Anything else you wanted to spotlight?
Oh yeah, I love this one. And this is a new word for me when we first heard it. It's be incarnational and not extractional, which basically means don't try to basically stand on a hill and shout, we're a Reboot, come to us. Incarnational is what Jesus did when he came to earth. We go and enter into the valleys with people. We get down in the pit with someone and say, this is how I climbed out. Will you come with me? It's going out, getting your hands dirty, living life with people is so important. So we're keeping in mind that we are incarnational. We're modeling Jesus when we're going out to do outreach.
That's good. Brian, anything else?
Yeah, for me, checking on participants when they miss a week.
Means so much.
That quick little check-in, even if it's just a text, it means a lot to them because first off, a lot of them have started to believe the lies that they don't matter, that people don't care.
Yeah.
And so when you send a quick message, even if it just says, missed you last night, you good, when they receive that, like that's starting to challenge that negative lie that they've believed that tells them that nobody cares.
Yep.
Because they know.
And that's not something their professional in their life is going to do for them. I mean, they might do it as a wellness check, but not in a friend kind of way.
That's right.
You know, what's that verse in Proverbs? A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and baskets of silver, right? I mean, a word at the right time. You know, I always used to say the right word in the right order at the right time changes lives.
Yeah.
You know, awesome. One more? Do you guys want to spotlight one more from this list? I know we could spotlight all of them. That's why we put them in the workbook.
Yeah, I mean, I think be authentic. It kind of goes along with what I was saying, and vulnerable in your interactions. Again, you have to set the tone. If you come up there and are super buttoned up and not willing to bring down the veil or the wall and share kind of your own story, then people are going to do the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So with regard, being sensitive to the fact that this is not all about you and you're not going to, spend the first 45 minutes telling your story necessarily. It's important to model vulnerability because people will respond.
Yeah, at the very, very beginning of this video, before even the first section and sort of that bumper video, I mentioned that the things that we're sharing with you today are things that we learned through the School of Hard Knocks. They're things that we had to learn the hard way. And I think that one of the things that might be important to pause here for just a second and to let Jenny just kind of share a little bit of the history, because I think as we got into this, we made a lot of mistakes in the early days because we were way outside of our comfort zone, way outside of our element. And that may be you right now. You might be a part of the leadership team that you're like, man, I don't know. This feels a little in over my head. I've never done much of this before. And so I want to let her share a little bit of that story, and then you'll see how from that comes this next group of leadership tips, because it was from those experiences that we started to realize, okay, when we do this, we get these results, but when we do that, we get those results. And we started to kind of see. So Jenny, why don't you share just a kind of a quick overview of how we got here?
Sure. So as Evan mentioned, I'm an occupational therapist. I was working with a traumatic brain injury clinic at Fort Campbell treating active duty soldiers. And almost every day I was really faced with the reality that while the medical system was addressing physical, emotional, and mental wounds, we were not adequately addressing the spiritual wounds of war. And that was leading to these people having broken marriages and being depressed and despondent and suicidal. And every day I would come home and would talk to Evan and just say, I feel like there's something more that I can do. And after praying about it, both of us felt like God put it on our hearts to create a place for these folks to start healing together in community, because again, while they were struggling in all these ways, they were struggling alone, and that's the worst. Like, they all felt like they were the only persons having these issues, asking these hard questions of God and not feeling like they were hearing any answers. And so we decided, with Evan's background and his experience with organizational leadership and teaching and training and leading Bible studies, to create a small group curriculum around the topic of faith and trauma. And it started in our living room and quickly got open doors to bring it on post Fort Campbell. That's where we met Brian. And things really grew after that. And not long after sort of establishing some of these Reboot courses around the country, we had first responders attending our courses because they too were struggling with the spiritual wounds of their work-related stress. And we felt like God was opening up doors for us to begin reaching that community. He brought us Chris and Ronella Adzit, who have many years of experience doing ministry to both veterans and first responders, to help us write the curriculum, Reboot First Responders. That's been amazing. And then most recently, we've taken what we've learned, as Evan said, for over 10 years of doing this work, and we've created Trauma Reboot, which is the most recent curriculum for anyone who's experienced trauma, tragedy, or trial to begin overcoming it together.
Yeah, I mean, and there were some moments where we saw in our marriage, we saw God doing things that we couldn't even describe. They were so beautiful. I mean, we saw things that we weren't even prepared to see the transformations happening in people's lives. And during that time period, though, there were some things that we started to realize, okay, there's some elements here that we need to make sure to train other people, because we believe the best leaders are always looking for the next leader, right? And there's a few tips. I wanted to highlight just a few here first. One is we want to avoid using lots of Christianese. Christianese is a language that's overly churchy. Sometimes it's uses a lot of terms that people who didn't grow up in the faith don't understand. And we see this a lot of times with leaders at churches. Sometimes they can't help themselves but use a lot of holy, baptized in the blood of Jesus, filled with the Holy Ghost type language, and people are like, I have no clue what this joker's talking about right now. And it alienates people, and it takes it from where it's no longer an on-ramp. Instead, it's a holy huddle program, a program where you have to be a Christian to be a part of it.
And many folks in our early days were like Brian. They hadn't been raised in that environment, and that was very foreign. And that's why we were really sensitive to, we didn't host it out of our church for the first many years. It was in our home, and then it was on post at Fort Campbell, because we tried to be incarnational.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two quick things to go along with that. One, I call Christianese anything that you would say at church, but not at the grocery store.
Okay.
Right. So if I'm walking down the grocery store and I see Evan, I'm not going to go, "Hey Evan, hey, how's that repentance doing today, buddy?"
Right.
Right. But at the second time,
unless I have some donuts, and I'll be like,
yeah. At the same time, you don't want to assume that people know what you're talking about. Like, when I came through Reboot the first time, they got into David versus Samson. And as they were talking about that, Evan told the story of David and Goliath, and a lot of people in the room were like frustrated that you walked through the story, whereas I was super glad because I had never heard of David and Goliath.
Right.
And imagine my surprise the next week when you started talking about King David and I found out that was the same dude, you know?
Yep.
But
Yep.
so there's a healthy balance between not speaking Christianese, but at the same time, don't assume that everyone was raised in a church.
Right. That's right. A few other things here that I just want to highlight quickly as we move through these. Follow the curriculum, right? There's this tendency sometimes to think, well, you know, Evan and Jenny and the team, they did a decent job writing it, but let me go ahead and add this piece or remove this section. And I got to tell you, yes, it's a bit of, you know, obviously it's our words. We want them to be taught in the way we taught them. But the real reason is this curriculum was not just our thoughts. This curriculum was actually developed by the participants. You see, we led Reboot courses for more than 4 years without any standardized curriculum. And what we would do is we were actually sort of market testing. We didn't know we were doing that. But what was happening is every week our participants were giving us feedback on what impacted them and what did not impact them. And so I want to share this with you. That's important because we used to say that our is trauma victim tested, trauma victim approved, or sufferer approved, right? We don't use the word victim much, but you get the idea of these are people who had been through it and who can now say, you know what you just taught there really worked for me. Mm-hmm. And that's an important point. A couple other things here. Set good boundaries for yourself. Don't try to pastor or overinvest in the wrong people. One of the things that along our journey that I had to learn the hard way is how to set good boundaries, how to not overextend myself, because I wanted people to heal so much. Sometimes I was willing to care more and work harder than they were working. And I'll take this opportunity to just recommend, after you've completed this training, one of the trainings that I've had a chance to go around and do a lot of in teaching is another product, another program I've written called Overcome Academy. Internally, we joke about it, that it's basically like the advanced leaders training. That after you complete this RLA, Reboot Leadership Academy, you might want to go and take the Overcome Academy because it's going to show you a lot more about how to set healthy boundaries, how to help people transform where they take their personal responsibility for their own transformation as opposed to trying to do it for them. And I'm going to share with you in that training all of the mistakes that I made, and they are numerous. This is about how to facilitate your course. But if you start getting into how to disciple people, how to help people one-on-one heal, Overcome Academy is a much better training for that. Okay? So I'll highlight that. And then the last one, I remember a few years ago, we walked into a group in Nashville, and all the lights were off, and there was a PowerPoint going through the course, and the man was lecturing, and I could almost hear Ben Stein, like slide, like clicking the slide, and half of the room was asleep. So we don't want it to be a classroom in that sense. We don't want it to be a PowerPoint-driven course. Any other leadership tips you guys really wanted to highlight there from this list? Yeah,
I was going to say, don't beat yourself up after a meeting. I mean, that's something that we had to learn, and we actually had to pray ourselves up for the conclusion of every meeting, because when we walked out of there, it was a pattern of like, oh my goodness, I said the wrong thing, and I missed an opportunity, I said too much. So just know that that's going to happen. It says, the devil prowls around like a lion looking for someone to devour. You have an enemy, an adversary who's seeking to devour you. So put your Holy Spirit goggles on, know what's happening, don't be unwise to his schemes, and identify those as attacks and pray over it. And yes, learn from your mistakes, but don't let it defeat you.
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to tag something on to what you said about boundaries. When I first started leading groups, the first thing that I would do is walk up and write my phone number on a big whiteboard and tell people, call me. Mm-hmm. If you're in crisis, if something happens, if you're not well, call me. And guess what happened?
They called you.
They called me.
Right.
At 3 in the morning, at 3:15, at 2 a.m.
Right. And unfortunately, you were probably already awake anyway, sadly.
Fair.
But yes.
It's fair. But that being the case, like one of the things that I realized is I didn't have boundaries set up. And so one of the things that I've put into practice that I tell every leader about is week 1, I ask every course participant to write down the 5 people they're closest to, right? And so usually it's like family, friends, Joe Bob down the street, whoever. And then I ask them to put my name number 6.
Yeah.
And why I do that is because then I tell them, this is your alert roster. In the middle of the night, something's not right or something like that. This is the order in which you call people.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is, for one, they still know that I care. They still know that I'm there for them and that I love them. But at the same time, now they're continuing to build relationship with other people that they've already started to sour the relationship. They're rebuilding that relationship and they're still getting help.
Yeah, they call it a support network, not a support person.
That's right.
All right, so let's move in. Let's talk, Brian, that's a perfect segue. We're talking about health. And as a leader, it is easy to not do a good job of taking care of ourselves. It's easy in this type of mission and ministry where people are hurting. People who are hurting, a lot of times, one of the symptoms of being wounded is you're unaware that other people are hurting as well, or that other people have needs, because you're just drowning trying to make sure you don't drown, right?
Sure.
It's not until you start to heal that you start to realize, okay, wait, other people have stuff going on too. And that's not their fault, it's just a condition, right? It's the situation that they're in. And so we want to give you just a couple quick things about how to deal with sort of your spiritual health, your mental health, and your physical health. And to do that, I'm going to ask Brian to kind of help me on this. So let's talk a little bit about spiritual health.
Yeah, one of the most important parts of keeping up good spiritual health through leading is communication with God. For me, that looks multiple ways, but for one is prayer. I have a prayer journal. I write down different prayers, and then every once in a while I go back and read prayers, and it's cool because I can see how 2 years ago I prayed for this participant.
Yeah, so
I just ran into him at the grocery store last week, and things are phenomenal. So it's like, thanks God, you did it again. I'm a huge proponent for the best way to get with the Creator is when it's just you and His creation. Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of time in the woods, a lot of time walking around, and just getting with Him and being quiet and still and listening to Him. Worship is another big way. Now, I don't know if you can tell by my unique voice, I can't sing a tune to carry whatever it's called.
You're not that bad.
So I don't sing, but however, for me, my definition of worship is anything that is done to glorify God. And so I do woodworking, and woodworking is my way of worship to God. But finding that mode of worship for you, if it's not musical, if it's not singing, that's fine. Not everybody can be the Evan Owens band, but if it is, great. If it is, great. But find that way of worship and get alone with Him. Another important part of it is just learning, right? Oftentimes, especially once you start leading, you feel like, well, I don't need to read my Bible as much. I'm going to get it on Sunday. I'm going to get it Reboot night. That'll be fine. Yeah. No, you've got to continue to read. You've got to continue to learn God's Word, because at the same time that you're leading this group, you now have more people that are looking to you for answers. Are you going to have every one of them? No.
Nope.
Half the time you want to have half of them. And that's okay, but staying in God's Word also helps you as you continue to grow in leadership to lead more like Him, to lead more like Jesus instead of taking over. Like the way I lead groups today and the way I led groups when I first started is completely different, because in the beginning, I led Reboot Recovery. Now he leads Reboot Recovery. I just stand up front.
Right.
And so at the same community with others, right? You've got to have a group of people that you can be real with. You have to have a group of people that, there's no facade, there's no Brian of Reboots, or I'm just Brian. And so I have a couple groups that I attend where I don't lead, I'm not the key speaker. I'm just Brian. I just chill in the back, drink my coffee, and have a good time. And with the last one being mentorship, there's a very important part of mentorship, right? The Bible teaches us that at all times we should have a Paul and we should have a Timothy or a Titus. That's when we're really practicing mentorship, is when we're both mentor and mentee. Leading a Reboot, you're going to have a ton of opportunities for Timothy and Titus. Finding the Paul can be a little bit more difficult. Right? At least that's what I had convinced myself. I had convinced myself that leadership's just lonely at the top. There wasn't anybody out there. Nobody was at the level that I was and understood what I was dealing with. And I was wrong, because I got lucky. My mentor has kind of been there since the beginning. It's Evan. And he understands Reboot. But at the same time, there are leaders all over this nation. If you jump on the Facebook leaders page, there are leaders who are willing to walk with you, willing to be there with you and give you advice. And guess what? They understand what it's like to lead a Reboot because they've been doing it.
Right.
That's good.
So those Pauls are out there, and you've got to find one and not be afraid to ask them, because people want to mentor just as much as you want to mentor.
Yeah. And it is easy to start caring for everybody else's spiritual health and forget your own.
Yeah.
That's right.
Number 2 is mental health. This one, right? One of our team members, he normally does these trainings with us, John, and he does a great job at teaching me about how to set good boundaries, how to rest instead of giving up and quitting, right? How to be creative and how to remember how to have fun doing it. One of the reasons why we don't take ourselves as seriously maybe as you might expect is partially because when we're dealing with trauma all day, every day, it's heavy enough as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about situations where people are, in the darkest, scariest situations that you can imagine. And so it's important that you find ways to have fun with people and you make time for play. What's that? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right? We don't want to become that. Being creative, Brian already mentioned his woodworking, and then resting is something that I'm not great at. But going ahead and setting good boundaries about turning my cell phone off, making sure that Jenny and I have date nights, making sure that Brian and I have date nights. These are all important things for us that we need to go do. Anything else, Jenny or Brian, to add to the mental health category?
The only thing I would add is for rest. We assume that rest means sleep, and let's see it what it really means, right? It means to take a break, to breathe, right? For some people, resting may just be sitting on the couch. For me, resting is playing cards with my kids, or just spending that time where I'm not thinking and focused on what's next or what needs to be done, but I'm just taking a moment to be thankful for the situation.
Yeah.
That might even look like taking a session off from leading Reboot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking a bit of a sabbatical for your own mental, emotional, spiritual health.
Especially once you have those other leaders up and running. You
That's
can
right.
do that, That's great. And the very last one here, again, physical health. It's important to get out to do diet and exercise. One, because leading a course can be exhausting at times, both physically and mentally, but it's also just good for you as a whole. So those are 3 kind of areas, right, when we talk about spiritual health, mental health, and physical health, that really are best leaders. And when I talk about our best leaders, I don't necessarily mean that they're best public speakers. I mean about the leaders who are the most consistent over the longest period of time. We have some leaders who are really great for 2 rotations. They burn out and we never hear from them again. And we have some leaders that have been doing it 3, 4, 5, 6 years, consistently impacting hundreds of lives. And it's because they figured out the balance of these 3 things. All right? Now, this is a bit of an interesting thing. This is something that years ago, we actually recorded a different version of this training. And in that, we didn't address this, but I'm going to go ahead and address it because times, they've changed. We live in an age where everybody has a megaphone known as social media, where we can get online and we can say whatever we want to hundreds or maybe even thousands of people in a moment. And we also live in a time, no matter what year it is, it seems like we live in a politically charged culture, where people have opinions on things that are happening in politics, where we want our opinions to be known. And I am not telling you that you should not share your opinion. I'm not telling you not to have an opinion. What I'm saying is that the people you're trying to reach may not share your opinion. Yeah. And so you have to figure out a couple things about how to lead in a politically charged culture. I'm going to hit on a few of them quickly. One is you want to recognize the importance of your relationship. You can't hate people and hope that they'll walk beside you in heaven at the same time. People will often go to these links to protect all these elements in their life, their property, their health, all this stuff, but then what do they do to protect their relationships or maybe even their possibility at a relationship with someone? I've found that a lot of times with even my family, I have some political disagreements at times with them, but they're still my family. And we have to put aside those things sometimes to be able to work together towards the common goal of unifying as a family, staying united. The same is true with your group. You have to realize you're going to have some cousin Eddies out there that you don't agree with, but you have to say, what's the main thing? And we're going to talk about that in a second. The second one is we recognize that we all experience the world differently. A lot of the people coming to your group, they did not grow up like you grew up. And how they grew up has tinted or changed or shaped the way that trauma impacted them and the way they now see the world. And so a lot of times what we say is, well, mentally we're saying, well, how could you not see this? Are you dumb? Are you blind? But it's also because we haven't walked a mile in their shoes yet. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe they're not dumb. Maybe they're not purposely trying to disagree with you, but maybe they just have had a life experience that turned them or to shape their view, turned their view the way that it is today. Understanding the basis for another person's opinion, we have found, is the first step towards true reconciliation. Number 3, have realistic expectations for group relationships. Either of you guys want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, so for that, if you watch TV, movies, anything, or listen to songs even, we all have this image of what the perfect father, the perfect mother, the perfect everything is, and that, that's our goal. Even as we're overcoming trauma, that's going to be the goal. And in reality, that's far from the truth. Dads don't know best. Mothers get tired and frazzled. Kids break stuff and mess stuff up, and that's okay. Really, the goal with having realistic expectations is acceptance, right? Accepting that families are not what they see on TV, and that's okay.
Yeah. I always talk about, a mentor of mine used to say that unspoken expectations are pre-planned disappointments, right? And so we want to set those expectations clearly, but differences don't have to lead to distance. Differences don't have to lead to distance. That we can have differences with one another and still love and still be in community. But that's not the way culture is right now. It's that if we have differences, we can't be in community with one another. And I'm telling you, if that's your mindset right now, your group will fail before it even gets started because it will have at its root divisiveness. You can't reach lost people and expect them to agree with you on everything you believe as a person who's been following God for 30 years. Okay? Next thing, number 4, don't fight battles you can avoid or can't win. I'll take this one, actually. We have to fight the primary battles. We have to keep the main thing the main thing. Let me tell you what. I could win some political battles through posting social things online. I could win the political argument and lose a chance at seeing their soul transformed. I could win that battle and lose the important battle, lose the war. Why? All for something that isn't as important. In this scenario, I want to be cautious. I want to be careful about what I say on my social media, recognizing that there's some potential prospective Reboot course members out there who are on social media today scrolling, seeing who am I as the leader of the course, and they're going to determine if they're going to sign up for your group or not based on what I post. They're also going to do it based on what you post. And if you post something that's so extreme one way or another, or that over and over again belaboring a certain point, you're going to lose an opportunity and you're going to win the wrong battle. We want to win the right battles. If you have a person in your group that is stuck on wanting to argue political battles all the time, a few questions. I'll ask them, why are you so determined to continually bring it back to politics? Now, I will say, if you're working with certain divisions of first responders or certain divisions of military, political climate is a piece of their job, right? That's okay. But when it starts to be soapboxing about something, you got to keep the main thing. We're here to talk about the spiritual wounds of war, and all that we have in common. The spiritual wounds of combat, the spiritual wounds of first responder, the spiritual wounds of trauma, whatever it is, that we all have in common, and we can all address. Another thing we can do is we can establish ground rules for discussion. The purpose of our courses is to heal, not harm or divide. And so one of the things that we'll say in our groups is say, if we start going down this path of getting into political debates, don't be surprised when I cut it off and say, let's get back on course. Right? That's a ground rule, saying we're not going to go there. Not that there's not a time and place for political discourse, not that I'm against you doing that. I am all for you voicing your opinions in those ways, but this is not the place where that happens. Okay? This is not the time to primarily do that. And lastly, if a person continues to do this, you might need just to take it offline and say, we're not going to talk about this. We'll talk about it outside the group, because the group is bigger than any one person's personal motive for being there. It has to be. We have to think about the whole, not the individual. And so sometimes I'll say, we're going to take it outside of this room, okay? And sometimes I'll have to get direct with the person and say, I hear what you're saying, but you have to understand not everybody shares your view. Why don't you and I talk about this after the group? And I'll even go like this with my hand as a nonverbal gesture. Why don't you and I talk, AKA stop, right? And we've had this happen in groups, especially if something bad's happened in culture that day. You're going to see it. And let me tell you the truth. Most of the time, it won't be a participant. A lot of times, it'll be a leader. And a leader who sets the tone that way is one that will allow that to happen in the group. He'll foster an environment where that happens. You don't want that to happen, right? You want to be a course that is an on-ramp to faith for people from all backgrounds. Okay? All right, good. Anything you guys want to add to that point there? All right, good. Lastly, Jenny, I'm going to talk to you about one last thing that doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen occasionally, which is how to help leaders who might be in crisis, especially how to have some difficult conversations sometimes with leaders. And we've had experiences with this. So why don't you talk about it a little bit and kind of set the stage. What kind of things can happen that sometimes cause a conversation like this to be needed?
Yeah. Well, as you know, sometimes the leadership team involves someone who is still on their healing journey, a graduate from the course who has seen that spark ignited in their heart and they want to help and they're growing, but maybe they haven't really grown into maturity yet in their faith and in their attitudes and in their actions. And so when you are leading alongside those individuals, you want to really have your eyes open and you want to be really supportive, but you have to be really direct sometimes in helping that leader because they represent you. They represent Reboot, and their actions have ramifications on the rest of the course.
Right.
And so here's some things that we can do to help those leaders if they're struggling. The first is to set expectations with your leaders. And one of those expectations is that they have appropriate boundaries in place. So if they're having things that are happening in their life where they're kind of stepping outside of this new transformed life that they're trying to lead, make sure they have good boundaries. They're not going to go to certain places or be around certain people. Just any other kind of discipleship and accountability type questions that you would ask people. You got to set that very directly with them. And so if something does happen and they've sort of, let's say it's a transgression, help them identify what led to that problem. What specific area needs to be addressed in their life and help them to identify what their next steps are going to be. Of course, an overarching rule is always leading with grace, but then following with truth. And again, you can learn more about that in Overcome Academy because you want this person to know that you're in their corner, you love them, you will always love them and stand with them, but they have to understand the truth of the situation and what needs to be done about it to rectify it so that, again, they can be restored to leadership. Sometimes that does mean taking a season off from leadership. I mean, there's going to be unique circumstances that dictate what the ramifications are. Stepping down from leadership, stepping into a different role, for what period of time. Again, that's part of establishing the expectation. Letting them know they can resume leadership once XYZ has taken place or what other accountability markers are established in their life. And setting that up as a time frame. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, they may not be invited to resume leadership. And that's a sad reality, but that is a reality because, again, as Evan said, the group as a whole is more important than any one person, and that includes the leadership team. So those are hard conversations to have, but we want you to go into this eyes wide open because it may happen.
It may, especially as you start getting graduates turned leaders who are new in that process and who maybe haven't even completed, Reboot Advance yet. Sometimes we find people around week 9, 10, 11, 12, they're really eager to lead. Maybe you want to say to them, hey, why don't you lead, but in less public capacity? Why don't you step into Reboot Advance first?
Definitely. Reboot Advance is going to help build up their spiritual foundations so that they're prepared really for what that role has in store for them.
Exactly. So this session, Leading Leaders, it's a joy to lead with other leaders. And sometimes it can also shape the nature or the culture of a group. That's the thing really that leaders do. They create an environment for a certain culture to thrive. And how you carry yourself as a leader, the space that you make for other leaders, the words that you say politically or non, the words that you say in terms of Christianese or more language that everyone can relate to, all those things are little forks in the road that take your group one direction or another direction. And we've worked really hard to make sure that we're reaching a lot of unchurched people in our groups. That's an important DNA component that the three of us have always shared. And so we never wanted to just be a Bible study program at a church. That's never what we've been. And we want you to share that because I will tell you, the greatest joy is seeing someone who literally is so far away from God, being able to heal and then connect with God and then grow in the relationship and then become a leader. And when you get to walk with someone through their whole journey, boy, I'll tell you, that is a rare gem in your journey. And it is something that I talk to so many other Christians who have never actually had a chance to do it. And it is so life-giving, and it really restores why I'm a Christian, why I believe that God still transforms.
The good news of the gospel.
The good news of the gospel, that's right. So Jenny's going to kick us off at the beginning of our next session, which is we've talked about leading leaders, and now we're going to talk a little bit in the next session, session number 3, about leading participants. We're going to do that when we come back.